Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we're going to be talking about why compensation committees should analyze their incentive plans. And joining me, expert in that area, is Marc Ullman, who's a partner with Meridian Compensation Partners. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you, TK. Pleasure to be with you.
So let's start with the first basic question. Why would compensation committees need to rethink or change their incentive structure or their plan design?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to make a distinction between the rethink and the tweak. Many companies will tweak their plans maybe every year, but certainly every couple of years. Priorities change, business environments change, and they may switch a weighting, add a metric. I want to make a distinction from that because that's actually a healthy place to be, where you have an incentive structure that allows you to move things around based on priorities. The rethinking is a different animal altogether, and there's a few reasons why a company might need to completely rethink their incentive structure. I mean, for one, there may have been shareholder pushback. This is a say-on-pay environment, and when companies don't get full support from their shareholders, oftentimes they'll go out and talk to them, and sometimes that could drive a company to rethink that. Another common reason is a complete change in the business economics, where a company and their business model just must change to reflect the new realities of their business. And that can drive a company to need to reshift. And then finally, you know, there might be just that plan out there that evolved over time where new metrics got added on, new bells and whistles added on, and it became an unwieldy beast that's too complicated for anyone to understand. Any one of these three things may be operating, and that could drive a company to make a real fundamental change and a rethink versus a tweak.
Well, you always want to make sure that you're incentivizing the right things. So that I'm sure is part of the process. So, okay, I'm on the comp committee, I'm into this. Tell me the do's and the don'ts as far as the process of going through this rethink or change.
Yeah, I mean, there are many. And anyone who's been through this process, and I'm sure many of your viewers have done that. And yes, the goal, like you said, is to be seeking an optimal alignment with pay for performance. So when you're doing a rethinking of your incentive plan, there's a handful of do's and don'ts. So for one, make sure if you need to rethink, make sure you don't tweak. That's a big one. Many companies might need to rethink their incentive plan completely, and what they do is they tweak and nibble around the edges. So if you're going to do something, make sure it matters. Make sure you're really isolating the true metrics that are indicative of the sort of whole of your performance. Another one is also on the other end of the spectrum, don't overdo it, don't over-engineer. You can't measure every single thing. You need to pick a few of the metrics that make most sense and focus on that. You know, there's an interesting thing when you go through these processes with many of our clients and many companies, and that is when you're going through the design process, you're thinking about the business economics, you're thinking about your business. Great rationale comes in those discussions that lead to specific plan design provisions being put in place. Record those in the moment. It's great for the CD&A down the road. It's great to communicate. There's solid rationale behind many of the pay design decisions that are made in this process. To make sure you're making the right decisions, you have to involve all the right people. Finance, HR, leadership, business unit, and corporate leadership. You want to have investor relations involved at certain points, perhaps. So the more perspective, the better. And certainly you want your business unit heads, like I said, and your corporate leaders involved, because you need them to help sort of roll this out down the road, and you need them to buy into the metrics and the targets that are ultimately going to be set. which leads to my next point. Make sure your plan pays something in year one. You do not want to design a whole big plan and get your target and ranges wrong so that you don't even hit threshold. So you have to always spend time on targets and ranges, but in year one, after a big rollout, you need to make sure something is paying in that design. It could hurt your credibility down the road. More and more companies are doing shareholder outreach regularly, and there's feedback that comes back. So do consider the feedback from shareholders when you're doing a rethink. Your investor relations may actually have some great insights. And as well as your investors, also their advisors like ISS and Glass Lewis, consider their perspectives. The thing you shouldn't do is just do what their sort of guidelines suggest. A Glass Lewis or an ISS. Don't just do what their pay guidelines suggest. Do what's right for your business, and if something is going to trip up one of their guidelines, just know it ahead of time, mitigate it when you communicate it, because there's solid business rationale underlying that decision, as I mentioned early. And then finally, an obvious one is of course, communicate. And you need to do that internally and externally. Internally, you have multiple audiences that need to understand the rationale for the changes, what it means for them in their business and in their jobs, as well as externally, communicating that to your shareholders. So there's a few do's and don'ts when rethinking your incentive structures.
Well, those are a lot of good points, and it sort of is a great segue into my next question, because we're all sort of watching the Trump administration. We've all heard these rumors about everything that's going to change, particularly with the executive comp and all the Dodd-Frank stuff and all that. So what kind of discussions, we have about a minute and a half left, so what kind of discussions are going on in the boardroom, or should be going on in the boardroom, related to the changes in the Trump administration?
Well, everyone is watching everything. They're watching the news, they're talking to their outside counsel, they're reading every bit of Washington insider scoop that they can get to see what they might be able to glean. The fact is the administration's had some fits and starts, but the one thing they've done is some deregulation already. So I think we can expect more of that, and if that happens, we may see some changes. I mean, some companies right now, the most important thing in terms of regulatory and what the administration might do has to do with Dodd-Frank rules. And so the CEO pay ratio is that one rule that's probably right at the center of it all. And the general view is that it'll be delayed, but companies need to be ready. And most companies by now are ready. If it's delayed, that'd be welcome. There are certainly companies out there that are hoping for a delay that maybe aren't as ready as they'd like to be. But that's sort of the most pressing matter. Whether the rest of the rules see the light of day or not is a lot of guesswork at this point, quite honestly. But the reality is there are things that the market has already sort of embraced. Say-on pay is not going anywhere. There are some things that we can be sure aren't going to change. When it comes to design, companies are always looking to align pay and performance, and the financial metrics that they use to sort of help align their pay for performance, that's not going to change as a result of this. So everyone's ears to the ground. I think it'll continue to be that way for a little while longer. Well,
we'll have to have you back sometime so we can get an update on what's been affected by some of the changes. But Marc, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us and talk about this important topic.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.